Farage is a shyster, a liar, an alleged criminal, and now he's proved himself to be a coward as well. So, you know, you don't turn up to your own victory party after having called it yourself. What's that about?
While he is successfully returned as MP for Clacton, having won 63% of the vote on Thursday, Nigel Farage was not present at 6 a.m. yesterday to hear the results read out because, according to Lee Anderson, there was a credible threat of planned disruption. And according to another statement, Nigel Farage did not want to be demeaned and humiliated by nobodies. Those nobodies, of course, include Camp Binface, who won almost 9,500 votes, which equates to a pretty substantial 26% of the electorate. Farage was instead at Farage Fest, a rally of 500 members of his supporters at a nearby airfield. Apparently it included an outdoor disco with a DJ, a band and even a giant Ferris wheel. And looming over proceedings was a giant poster of Farage with the words "Welcome to Clacton." I mean, what a fest that sounds like. Timandra, were you surprised not to see him show up at the count? I mean, he loves the victory lap.
I was surprised, and I was actually disappointed. I feel like if I was a Clacton voter, I'd feel pretty aggrieved because, first of all the other mainstream parties go, "Oh no, we're not going to play. We don't think there should be one, so we're not going to turn up," which is frankly insulting to the voters. And then Farage, who's going, "Oh look, see how much contempt they all have for you." He doesn't show up even when he's won. And I am told, I haven't fact-checked this, I'm told the last person to win an election and not show up was Bobby Sands.
Wow.
And I think he had a better excuse.
He did have a better excuse. Well, he definitely wasn't on the Ferris wheel at the time, was he? Mark, do you think Nigel Farage's position is strengthened or weakened by this really quite expensive exercise?
I mean, it was expensive, but first of all, might I say, I don't want Farage mentioned in the same breath as Bobby Sands, you know. I mean, Farage is a shyster, a liar, an alleged criminal, and now he's proved himself to be a coward as well. So, you know, you don't turn up to your own victory party after having called it yourself. What's that about? And I think there's something that I've been pondering. I've got a lot of mates and family members who are voting Reform and said they're going to vote Reform. And they don't like Nigel Farage.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so I quizzed them quite a bit about it. And what they say is, we know he's no good. You know, we know he's a shyster, but we don't care. We want our feelings and our problems acknowledged. And we want that to be out there, and the main parties are not acknowledging that. So I've sort of come up with this really brilliant phrase about it, which is tough on Farage, but tough on the causes of Farage. It's a totally original phrase. No one's thought of it before. And I don't think it's just about him. Do you know what I mean? He's literally a circus, and a really rubbish one. You know, look like a really big, good circus with animals and, you know, and I know it's not loud anymore and all that. He's a really rubbish circus, isn't he? The one that they sort of put on at your local council, you know, with three
Some
people in
cats.
leotards, and a couple of... That's what he is. So I'm not overly bothered about him, but I am bothered about it sort of masks this genuine problem that people have and feeling that people have. And I think even if you got rid of Farage, that feeling wouldn't go away and needs to be dealt with. And I think...
Yes, he's a symptom, not the cause.
Yeah, and I think I am hopeful that actually mainstream politics is turning back to kind of address that on both big parties, actually.
Well, on that note, so do you think that the major parties were right or wrong in boycotting it?
I think they were wrong. I think they were wrong because even though it was very likely they would lose, as they did last time, they would have had the chance to show up and show they were taking the voters seriously and make their arguments why they should vote for Labour or Conservatives or whoever and not Reform. And by not playing, they were like, oh, we don't really take elections seriously if Farage calls them. Like, well, democracy is pretty important. And just because it's called not on your terms, if you value democracy, you should still take part.
And obviously there was a substantial number of people, at least 27%, who didn't want to vote for Nigel Farage. I'm really interested by your family and friends who are pro-reform but anti-Farage, because that's not necessarily an approach that I've heard very much. And it's certainly not an approach that he considers, he thinks that he's there to save reform and to bring the reform vote. Do you think that they are a kind of significant minority then who are just quite anti-Farage but don't feel they're represented by anybody else right now?
Yeah, I think that's the deeper thing. I mean, I would say out of the 5 friends and family that I've spoken to a lot about this. I'd say 4 of them don't like Farage. 1 of them likes him quite a bit, but doesn't love him. And they all acknowledge he's deeply flawed, but they just feel that he symbolises, their pain. If you think about it from their point of view, they've knocked their pipes out for 20 years now without a real pay rise. Life's pretty hard. They've had an absolute parade of muppets running the country, haven't they? And leaders of both parties actually been absolutely hopeless. And they don't feel like they're represented. And even worse, when they do really care about something, and okay, let's not take immigration because it's so hot, but let's say housing, they just don't feel listened to or heard. And that anger builds up over a period of time. And I think it's a legitimate thing to acknowledge that. And I think actually it would diffuse the nonsense of Farage once and for all. He is literally, the clown at the circus, but it doesn't mean that there isn't a problem that created him. So yeah, tougher on the causes, I would say, of Farage, and get rid of him, but who cares about him really?
I mean, it's interesting because I think there are multiple ways of reading the results from Clacton this week, and actually there's multiple ways, even in the pages of the Times, that it's being interpreted. So John Curtis says today that Farage's real battle lies ahead, and that a burn and bounce, a Tory revival under Kemi Badenoch, and a challenge from Restored Britain have all eroded what once seemed an unassailable lead for reform. Patrick Maguire, meanwhile, says last year, having unexpectedly emerged as Britain's government in waiting, reform sought establishment credibility and found they didn't much like it. Now, as they enter a new phase, he says they are deliberately and ostentatiously breaking every one of its rules, subverting its expectations and disregarding its conventions. And in places like Clacton, that's still a winning proposition. Timandra, how do you interpret where they're at now following this by-election and in relation to the other major parties? I mean, because I think we can call them, they are a proper party. They're not a protest party.
They are a mainstream. Yeah. They're a mainstream party.
Only just now this week has Labour overtaken them again in terms of polling. So.
Yeah, and no, I think it's quite interesting. I mean, I thought the John Curtis piece was especially interesting. I have a lot of time for him, and the fact that since Burnham came in, he has slightly taken the wind out of their sails slightly, because he came in basically saying, I'm going to bring change. I mean, that was really striking when he got elected in his by-election, and people were kind of surprised, like, why are you surprised? There's a massive demand for change, and he represented the best chance of changing who the Prime Minister was. So even though he's still Labour, that was basically his manifesto, and I think he's still riding that. Whether in 6 months people will still feel that he's actually got the potential to change things is another matter. But at the moment, I think people are optimistic, think, oh yeah, he's come in, he's talking a different talk, maybe he's going to do something. And then the reform, because they are not doing, they don't have much chance to show what they would actually do. They're running some councils. I think those have a mixed record. I've not really been following it, but it's still a bit like they represent symbolically the chance to change everything and stick 2 fingers up to the mainstream parties. But if you're going to get actual change by voting for a mainstream party, maybe you'd rather do that because you feel it's more of a known quantity. And Kemi Badenoch, I think, is showing up quite consistently well and having consistent policies, consistently critiquing the government. So
and has
I'm
said
not
very
surprised.
firmly she's not prepared to do any sort of pact. She's going to, maintain the Conservative Party as a solo entity as it's been.
And I think that, I can see why support for her is rising. So, in principle, I could see that if Labour and the Conservatives both start to, exactly as Mark says, actually listen to the mass of ordinary people and what people are concerned about, and start to do some tangible things to make people's lives better instead of more difficult, then, reform might get edged out. And I don't know how much of that would be Farage's shenanigans and how much would just be, look, we don't really know what you stand for. You're quite an odd mix of people sometimes. Perhaps, better the devil you know.
I mean, the Times also does point out today that the investigation into the £5 million gift that Farage received from Christopher Harbour could drag on for many more months, probably until Easter next year at least. Farage obviously wants to be talking about migration, he wants to talk about crime, the cost of living, but this investigation is going to take up quite a lot of his political bandwidth. How much do you think that's going to hobble him, Mark?
I don't think it's that huge, in the sense that, people think Keir Starmer was taking money for clothes and concerts, and, there's a sort of perception that they're all at it a bit, and I think there's less surprise that he's been trousering money, than perhaps with some of the others. But I think that bandwidth thing is important because he relies on, the conversation being especially around race, especially around the boats, especially around people's anger, and he actually trades off that frustration and that anger. And the less space there is for that conversation and the more there is for wondering what he's up to, I think is quite positive, actually. So I don't think in itself, people are overly going, oh my God, it turns out he was trousering money. They're actually going, obviously he was trousering money. Not that we've proved that he has, I don't think, but anyway, just to be clear. But it's more that, he needs that oxygen of publicity and storyline. And I also think, do you know what, if Andy Burnham and Kemi Badenoch, who look promisingly like they might actually have a proper battle of ideas, if that becomes a debate about a proper debate about the country's future, which I think it will be, hopefully it will be, that also eats into that space as well, and he could quickly find himself fairly irrelevant, I hope,